Okay, guys, I think we're about ready to get started here this morning. Thank you all for coming out on the short notice. What we want to do today is give you a presentation on the future financial situation of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. Basically, where we've been, where we're at now, and what the future looks like. And today, Rich Palmer, Deputy Executive Director, who has been working on this since probably in December, it's probably given this presentation about 25 times so far, is going to run through this PowerPoint presentation, and at the end of that, you'll have the opportunity to ask any questions that you may have from the presentation. All right, turn it over to Rich. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I echo the Executive Director's comments of thank you for taking the time to come out. We appreciate it. As Matt said, this has been a project we've been working on pretty much all this year since 2015 that's now kind of culminating to where we're at. We want to get our message out, and we appreciate you showing up for this briefing. Our agency funding structure is very similar to most of the other wildlife agencies across the country, in that the North American wildlife model of conservation is our primary mode, essentially, which means hunting license fees account for almost 40% of the agency's revenue. Most important point to take with that is that there's not been a license increase for more than 15 years. Our last license increase was in 1999. I don't know of any other state agencies that have not had any revenue increase since 1999, or for that matter, any other private industry. Our revenue versus expenditures in fiscal year 13-14 were $103 million in revenues, but our expenditures were $107 million, almost $108 million, leaving a deficit of almost $5 million. Reasons for that, part of it are increased costs associated with the Affordable Care Act, increases in the retirement contributions that the agencies are required to pay into the retirement system, an overall increase in health care benefit costs, and along with that, workers' compensation costs and a variety of other benefit costs, and mandated participation in various projects by the Office of Administration. Although the Game Commission is an independent agency, we are still required to follow certain procedures followed by the Office of Administration. Some of these projects, and I'll just highlight a couple, but for example, when the state decides it's going to switch a computer system and mandates that the individual agencies transfer from a mainframe data system into a new system, the agencies have to comply with that, but that's also a cost that is associated to the Pennsylvania Game Commission. And again, the important part to remember there is the Pennsylvania Game Commission receives no general fund tax monies. We are independently funded and primarily through license sales. And of course, general inflation. And what I would use as the easiest example of general inflation is in 1998 and 99, when we were pursuing the last license increase, the national average gas price was $1 a gallon. In 2014, which are the most recent numbers I could find, the national average gas price was over $3 a gallon. So if you take that percentage of increase and understand that fuel costs impact everything else, that is some of the best example that I could provide of the general inflation we faced and the impacts that it's had on the agency. However, there's still some more. One of the things is talking about today's budget. Our fiscal year request for this year was $115 million that we requested. We had $106 million that was approved. Our projected revenue is at $102 million, yet our projected expenditures are at $114 million. This leaves a projected deficit this year of $12 million. In addition to that, though, keep in mind that approximately $15 million had to be reallocated from our operational budget, meaning the budget that we have to actually make things happen on the ground out there, to our personnel budget to pay for our contractual obligations and personnel expenses. This is our personnel versus operational expenses. Our approved budget was $106 million. Our projected personnel expenses are $82 million. The budget remaining for operations is only $24 million. Last year's operational budget was $35 million. This year's operational budget was planned to be about $35 million. However, we have an $11 million deficit in our operational budget. Now, that's an important point to make, because what that means is you're talking about almost a 30% decrease in your available operational budget. That's going to have some significant impacts on our ability to accomplish our mission. What the impacts are is major project and program cuts. Positions are being eliminated or not backfilled. Some of our major projects that we wanted to do to move forward, such as the Pymatumi Visitor Center, are having to be abandoned in the short term at least. Various habitat projects are being scaled back, as well as game lands acquisitions are being scaled back. Headquarters building for biologists in State College has had to be placed on hold. A number of research projects are being eliminated or scaled back. The Elk Range infrastructure projects have had to be scaled back. We've still been able to complete some of those, but there's still a lot there we'd like to do that we're not going to be able to do. And probably the biggest one that impacts us is compromising the Game Commission's ability to maximize federal Pittman-Robertson grant funds, because most of those funds require a matching fund from the agency. And just to clarify, what the federal Pittman-Robertson grant funds are an 11% excise tax on arms and ammunition that is collected by the federal government, funneled through U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then doled out to states on a formula that they calculate. There's been significant Pittman-Robertson funds available in the last few years. However, Pennsylvania is now approaching, like many other states in the Northeast, the level where we may have to walk away and leave federal grant money laying on the table because we simply cannot afford the matching grant funds to go with it. And we certainly would not be alone. Many other states have been in that position. To give you an example, though, the biggest aspect of inflation, in fiscal year 97-98, we had 731 employees across the agency, and that's all classifications, from IT to clerical to warehouse, foresters, surveyors, biologists, officers. That's every employee we have in a full-time position, and our personnel expenses were $40.4 million. Today, we have less employees. We actually have 714 employees. However, our personnel expenses are $82.1 million. So our personnel expenses have doubled during that 15-year time frame that we've gone without a revenue increase. Significant point to make. One of the things I think is also important to make is that the Game Commission itself has very little control over our personnel expenses. The contracts are negotiated by the Commonwealth. Benefits are negotiated by the Commonwealth because they're essentially the same for all state employees. The only way we really have to control our personnel costs is to control the number of personnel that we have. Now the projections for the future. We've already talked about fiscal year 13-14, where we had almost a $5 million deficit. However, one of the things that's important to realize is the high water mark of our revenues was in 14-15. We received about $28 million in those federal grant funds that we talked about from Pittman-Robertson funds. which was significantly higher than our long-term average. However, our expenditures still outpaced, and we had about a $6 million deficit. The important part to note is from here on out, our revenue projections decrease. And as these revenue projections decrease, our expenditures and our projected expenditures increase. And this is only to do what we are currently doing. This is without calculating in a number of new programs and projects that we would like to implement. And within our strategic plan that goes through 2020, there's actually a need for more than this. This is based on our current expenditures and trajectory. By the year 2020, the end of this strategic plan, if nothing changes, we would be at a $35 million deficit. And obviously that is not going to happen because the budgets to do that would not be approved. So one of the things that we're often asked, and one of the things that we found out during these presentations that we have to dispel, is this myth that the Game Commission is all flush with a lot of oil, gas, and mineral and royalty monies. And the best way to do that is to show the long-term history since the last license increase of revenues versus expenditures. So I'll walk you through that with this graph a little bit right now. I realize it's a little bit tedious, it's a little difficult to see, but we'll go through it. So in 98 and 99, the blue line is revenues, the red line is expenditures. And we had reached the point where our expenditures were outpacing our revenues. We achieved the license increase, although it was not as significant as we had asked for, and we even acknowledged at the time that that license increase would probably not even last us 5 years because it had been whittled down into the process. But in 99, we achieved it, and you see the revenues just climbed above the expenditures. And then in 2000, 2001, they were about even, and as we predicted, by 2001, 2002, the revenues were already being outpaced by expenditures yet again. That trend continued all the way up to 2004, where the expenditures were significantly starting to outpace the revenues. This forced us into an austerity program at that time, and one of the most significant impacts of that, again, because personnel expenses are so significant, is we were not backfilling positions. And out of those 700 positions that we had over 100 positions that were not filled. Now, obviously, when you only have a little over 700 employees and you have 100 positions that are not filled across various classifications, that significantly impacted our ability to accomplish our mission and to provide services to the citizens of the Commonwealth. However, that's what we were forced to do. Then we simply got lucky. As a measure of the austerity program and holding all those positions back, we were able to reduce our expenditures slightly, and our revenues increased in 2005, primarily due to high timber markets and also some high conventional oil markets. So for a few years, those high markets in timber and the OGM at the time allowed us to survive. We should have had the license increase in this time frame. We simply used this additional revenue to carry us through and basically make up for what license revenue should have been acquired to cover. However, that only lasts a few years. About 07, 08, you see them kind of balancing out again. Same thing in 08, 09. Then, by 2010, expenditures were already outpacing again. So all of this previous increase had started to taper off. The markets had tapered off. Still no increase in license revenue, and we were back to increased expenditures over revenue. By 2010, a couple of things happened. That's when the significant increase in the federal Pittman-Robertson funding occurred. Historically, prior to about 2008, we would receive somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $12 million in Pittman-Robertson funds every year. Started to get into this time frame, and there was a dramatic increase, and that started raising over a period of time into 18 million, 20 million, into that range. So it was a significant increase in Pittman-Robertson funds. Also around this time is when we started realizing some additional funds from the Marcellus Shale. So again, starting here in about 2010, we were just very, very fortunate to have an increase in those non-licensed generated revenues, the Pittman-Robertson and OGM, primarily Marcellus at this point. So that helped us, again, get through a few years. But by 2012-13, the revenues had started to decrease. They kind of had balanced out a little bit, and the expenditures continued to go up. And again, the bulk of these expenditures are personnel expenses, which are outside of our control. And you see this trend continuing up into the time frame that we just talked about into 2013-14. And then the significant aspect here, though, is this triangle. Again, this is a decrease and a flat line in the projected revenues, yet a significant increase in projected expenditures. Obviously, this is the time frame that we are concerned about. So, the financial briefing that I just gave you with the projections, part of that ties into, we didn't just pick a number for a license increase. It is calculated upon our projected needs to accomplish the agency's mission. But I think you have to put in comparison first, a comparison of the hunting license fees. And what you see on this chart is a comparison of a lot of our surrounding states, but also some states with some similar hunting populations and hunting opportunities to Pennsylvania. Texas, Michigan, and Pennsylvania are always the big three in license sales. Those are the top 3 license sales in the nation. And some of the states, such as Wisconsin, have very similar hunting opportunities as Pennsylvania. So this is the cost of the license in those states for a resident hunter to hunt antlered deer, spring and fall turkey, pheasants, and other small game and waterfowl. And you can see where Pennsylvania falls on this chart in relation to the license fees across the country, or across these particular states. With that being said, and again, I realize this graph's a little bit tedious, but this is all 50 states. And you can see where Pennsylvania falls in the grand scheme of license prices. We are the second most inexpensive license price in the entire nation, next to Hawaii. However, what's also important with this is to keep in mind that a number of these other states are not solely self-funded the way the Pennsylvania Game Commission is. They do receive general appropriation tax funds, some of them significant. Missouri receives 1/8% of the state sales tax that goes directly to the State Wildlife Agency. Pennsylvania receives none of this general funding. So again, here we are. Now, this leads us to our proposal, and the reason I show this graph is that when you see our proposal, what we're going to ask for in the first year increase to a general license is currently $19. We're asking for an increase of $29, but take that in context of this graph. There's 40. Where does $29 for a general license put us still at the national level? And for the hunting opportunities there are in Pennsylvania, with approaching 1.5 million acres of state game lands and more public land base than any state east of the Mississippi, it's pretty good value, especially with the number of species that we have to hunt here. And by the way, that 1.5 million acres of state game lands alone is a land base about the size of the state of Delaware. So here's our proposal that we've drafted up, and I'll just kind of hit some of the highlights with this. The adult resident license, what you see in this column, are classes of licenses, and then the current price of that license. Then based upon the 2014 sales, the revenue that was generated from these licenses. Then you see year one of our proposal. And again, the way that this proposal was drafted was based upon our projected need for funding and how much we need to continue operating not only through 2020 of the strategic plan. This proposal is tied to a strategic plan, and that one of our major goals is to achieve stable long-term funding. And by that we mean stable funding for at least 10 years. So in year one, the general license would increase from $19 by $10 to a total of $29. The reason that that was selected is that we know that a 50% increase, roughly a 50% increase on that general license, is politically achievable, and it's also within the tolerable range of sportsmen. And the reason I can say that is it's been historically proven. When we did the 98.99 license increase, the license price went from $12 to $19, which was actually a little over a 50% increase. We only had about a 3% decline in license sales. And not all of that 3% decline in license sales is necessarily attributed to that increase, because you have to remember license sales were trending down at that time anyway. So this is why the general license was selected. But this increase that's proposed here only gets us about $6 million. And obviously that's not enough to what we need for our projected needs. So we have to look at some of the other classes of licenses. We're proposing no increase to the junior hunting license or the junior hunting combo. Obviously, recruitment of hunters is a major impact and a major effort of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. So we're not proposing any increase to the junior licenses, nor are we proposing any increase to the senior license. However, when we get into the individual licenses, the resident bear, we're proposing a $5 increase for a total of $20. The antlerless license, we're proposing a $5 increase for a total of $10. And we also know that this is within the range of tolerance too. As an example, our DMAP tags. DMAP tags are $10.70 with the issuing agent fee. They're sold. DMAP tags are almost always sold out. So we know that this $10 is a very reasonable price within that range. Resident archery, same thing, $5 increase for a total of $20. Muzzleloader is currently $10. It was not increased the last time with the license increase. However, what has changed since '99? There's been an additional week of opportunity added for muzzleloaders with the early muzzleloader season, and we felt that it was time to bring that additional license up to the same as the archery and the bear licenses, to a $20. And resident fur taker would be the same increase as the resident hunting. And a small increase to the migratory game bird license to $5, which is somewhat becoming the standard amongst the different states. And the migratory game bird license is something that is tied into the federal harvest information program for migratory birds. And a small increase to the special wild turkey license. This is the second wild turkey tag for the spring. If this whole package would be adopted as is, what it would do was it would take us from this area to this area, and roughly 26 million to 41 million. Now, what did I say the deficit was? projected to be $35 million by year 20. So this, if it's achieved, then we would have to adjust it for 3% based upon our prior experience of a 3% decline in licenses. So this 3% decline then would result in about still right around $40 million. Part of the reason that we need that buffer, and part of the example I would show you for some unanticipated costs and inflation in our expenditures, in 98 and 99, when we were approaching that license increase, we did not have chronic wasting disease in Pennsylvania. We did not have white nose syndrome in Pennsylvania affecting the bats, and we did not have West Nile virus in Pennsylvania. Just those three categories alone were unanticipated expenses that we've had to cover during this time frame that were never projected for. And all of our wildlife health activities carry a significant amount of expenditures out of the agency budget. And we don't know what's on the horizon. And also, some of this would be to accomplish some of the things within the strategic plan that are above and beyond what we're already doing. Currently, for an individual that bought every license, including the fur taker license, the total price in Pennsylvania for all the licenses would be $105. Under the proposal, it would be $158. And remember, this includes the fur taker, which a number of people may or may not buy. But we also propose creating a new category of license called the Ultimate Outdoorsman, that for these sportsmen that do participate in all of these different activities, they could purchase the Ultimate Outdoorsman license, and instead of having a $53 increase in their total license fees, they could have a $20 increase in their total license fees. So for an additional $20, they could hunt and trap everything that there is in Pennsylvania under this proposal. We've also, as I said before, we've tried to project for stable long-term funding. Long-term meaning 10 years or more. We realize that there's only so much achievable in a first-year license increase. So what we've proposed is an incremental strategy. And part of the reason we're talking long-term stable funding is that historically, and this is an important point to make, historically we know that we only achieve a license increase about every 10 to 12 years. So for financial planning, it only makes sense to try to achieve at least 10 years worth of revenue based upon the historical record of license increases. The other important point that I'll make is if you go back and remember I said we haven't had a license increase since 1999, over 15 years. In all of agency history since 1895, this is the second longest period of time that we have ever gone without a license increase. The first longest period of time was during the Great Depression and World War II. So this is the second longest period of time in history that we've gone without a license increase. So this proposal would give us that long-term funding to make sure that we have that funding, knowing that we cannot anticipate another license increase for at least 10 to 12 years. As this license, we said on the general license, this would be about a 50% increase of the current base price. The subsequent years, in years 3 and 5, would be roughly a 25% increase of the current today's base price. So here's the upfront to make up for the 15 years, and here's the stable long-term funding prices. With a similar strategy on the additional licenses. Going up, other than the Antlers licenses, going up about $5 in each of the other subsequent years. And again then, in the long term, this would provide us that stable long-term funding to carry us through what we would anticipate when it would be possible to achieve another license increase. Again, though, if you look at this Ultimate Outdoorsman license, in year 3, total license cost would be $190.50. The Ultimate Outdoorsman would be $150. $223 in total license costs in year 5, and Ultimate Outdoorsman $175. So the value of this Ultimate Outdoorsman increases with the incremental strategy. Similarly, for the non-resident licenses, what our proposal is that since we were increasing the general license fee for residents by 50%, we think that it's only fair to increase it by the same percentage for non-residents. So it would propose a year 1 increase of $50 on the general license for a total of $150. Which would generate about $2.3 million in additional revenue. And same thing with the individual tags. No increases on the junior, senior, or junior combo or junior, and slight percentage increases on the additional licenses. Again, what we would offer, here's the adjusted 3%. Roughly $9 million in additional non-resident license fees that would also supplement it. The Ultimate Outdoorsman license would also be available for the non-residents. Their total license cost to hunt and trap everything in Pennsylvania would be $505. And I would submit to you, if you look at non-resident license fees around the country, this is still a very, very, very competitive market price. Number of other states to hunt and trap all of these species, your non-resident license would be significantly higher than that. Yet we still offer the ability to purchase this Ultimate Outdoorsman license for the sportsman that participates in all these activities and saves about $100. And the same percentage of increases in years 3 and years 5. And again, the value is about the same in year 3, goes down a little bit in year 5, but it still is a value off of the base license. So with that, concludes the presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions that anyone would have. Charlie.